capture planning, what to do before pursuing a funding opportunity. Today, there are 5 things we are going to learn through this masterclass. Number 1 is what is capture planning. Number 2, we are going to learn why is capture planning important. And number 3, what are the key components of capture planning? Number 4, an illustrative capture planning process. And the 5th one will be an illustrative capture planning budget. As I mentioned, and Dr. Ramona mentioned, this is part of the book that we co-authored last year, and it was published last year and released at the NGO Whisperer Global Summit 2023. So let's go into capture planning. What really is capture planning? Capture planning is a strategic approach to winning contracts and grants by identifying, understanding, addressing target clients or donors' needs and requirements. When we speak about grants and contracts, these are 2 different things. One is very focused on acquisition of services, and the other one is acquisition of commodities. So when you think about when you're reaching out to a funder or a partner who is supporting your work, you're either going to offer services or you're going to offer products. And these are the 2 different ways you can solicit and get funding. And so the process of identifying, the process of understanding, the process of addressing the needs of the people you're working with, the donor, the clients, that is called capture planning. And capture planning is something that people do haphazardly, and sometimes they do not even think of it as a process that really needs to be brought into consideration. People think it's so casual. I found out this donor, and all of a sudden, let's go after this funding. And sometimes what happens is, when that happens, ladies and gentlemen, when that happens, leaders of nonprofits, you end up with all these leads that are leading you nowhere, because you are following up everywhere where you see a $ or a £sign without really understanding the needs of the donor and the client. And you end up with so many no's instead of converting those no's into yes. And there's a way in which you can do this. And this is why capture planning is a systematic, proactive, team-driven process that ensures all necessary resources and skills and partnerships are in place to deliver projects and programs successfully. So let's go to the second part of it. And as I mentioned, you can get more information from Chapter 1 of Fit for the Future, a guidebook for nonprofits to thrive in a changing world, Volume 1. That's available on our website at ngowhisperer.com/books. All right. Let's go to, and this is the book that I was referring to. That's the book. You can take a screenshot. You can go to the link and check it out for yourself. It's available on Amazon. All right. Why is capture planning important? I want to look at this from 2 perspectives. One is an organization that doesn't use capture planning, and an organization that does capture planning. And so looking at these 2 sides of the coin, you will see that with capture planning, your processes are proactive, meaning the organizations proactively identifies and pursues funding and opportunities. When you look at without capture planning, an organization really reacts to requests for proposals, which are RFPs, and other calls for funding, and it is more reactive as opposed to being proactive. Number 2 is, with capture planning, you have a competitive advantage. Why is that so? Because organizations better understand their value proposition. Without capture planning, you remain stagnant because you don't really understand your value proposition. What is your value proposition? This is what you're bringing to the table. You've had people ask, what are you bringing to the table? The same way you would ask someone, what are you bringing to the table, is the same way donors would look at your organization and look at your strengths and the opportunities that lie there and ask you, what are you bringing to the table? When you conduct a thorough capture planning process, you will understand what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what opportunities lie, and what threats could endanger your organization, right? The third thing is increased win rate. Organizations build strong relationships with funders and increase their win rate when they conduct capture planning process. And as we mentioned at the beginning in the definition, it is a process of identifying, of understanding, and building relationships with donors and meeting the needs of these donors. All right. Number 3, we're going to look at what are the key components of a capture planning process. So we have this cylinder, and this cylinder has like 6 steps, and we will start from the top, which is the first cylinder or the first layer of this cylinder, which is basically a funnel. It's a funnel that is narrow at the bottom and wide at the top. So the first ring of this cylinder or funnel is called opportunity identification. The second step is opportunity qualification, meaning once you've identified an opportunity, you qualify it. It's more like a process of go, no go, decision-making process. And that is included also in the opportunity qualification process, so that as much as you might have 100 identified opportunities, you might only qualify 10 of them. Why? Because all the other 90 are not aligned to your mission, vision, and goals as an organization. Or it could be that even though you are aligned, the values of those organizations are not aligned with your values. The third step speaks of competitive assessment and analysis. When you're conducting competitive analysis, assessment and analysis, you're using different tools. And one of the most commonly used tools is a SWOT analysis. There are many other tools that you could use, pestle analysis, Porter's 5 forces principles. You can use all this. All these are tools that can be used for your organization to understand itself better. Remember, organization is an entity. It's an organism by itself. An organization is a living being. It's an organism by itself that lives and breathes. And it has its own legs and it moves in certain directions. And so what I would ask you is, what kind of an animal is your organization? Are you swift? Are you quick at making decisions, or are you sluggish? You know, there are all these animals. We are often asked, what's your spirit animal? And the same way, your organization has characteristics that could be aligned to animals. So what kind of spirit does your organization have? And that's where you need to understand what your organization is. And that comes in analysis and assessment. The organization takes the character and the attributes of its leadership. There's a very famous sentence in one of John Maxwell's book. He says, everything rises and falls on leadership. The leadership of your organization will determine who you are as an organization. And I say who and not what it is, because an organization is a living being. And it can thrive and be healthy, or its health can dwindle. The fourth step, or the fourth cylinder, is customer engagement. One of the things that we have insisted so much at the NGO Whisperer Global Fellowship Program is learning how to treat your customers better. And we were speaking about moments of truth. Moments of truth are moments of the experiences people you serve have when they come in contact with you. So what are the moments of truth in your organization? Step number 5 speaks about win strategy development. When you're thinking about developing your win strategy, it's not just about winning and moving forward with a win. It's also about keeping and maintaining those whom you work with and have supported you to get this win. So there you will need to identify who are the stakeholders at play that have helped you to win this funding, to win this contract, and how can you keep them? You're thinking about your employees, how can you keep them? You're thinking about what Dr. Ramona mentioned earlier about how diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility helps you to retain your staff. And it comes in there when you think about your win strategy. An organization that has a high attrition cannot win because every time people leave, they leave with intellectual property of the organization, not in a manner of them really taking it physically, but they are taking it here in their brains. And they're taking it here in their heart. So the culture goes away with some people. And you'll notice in some organizations, once certain types of people leave, things change, the atmosphere change, because that person was actually the heart and soul of the department, for example. So your win strategy development is not just about tangible stuff like resources, money, financial support. It's also about retaining your staff. And finally, when you think about capture planning process, you're thinking about action planning and execution of this process. And that will require you to develop a budget, which takes us to the next level. And this is an example of what we have used with different organizations. So these are the steps I have shared there now in a table format and the techniques that we used. Of course, person responsible would be someone who you would be working with, and frequency and level of effort, definitely that has to be discussed across the organization. So for example, let's start with the first ring, which is new opportunity identification. There you will need to conduct desk research, and also it could be through referrals. And there could be someone who is responsible for doing that in your organization. And there has to be an agreement on how much time they're going to spend searching for new opportunities. Many organizations are very good at this. However, the second step on qualification is where the problem comes in, where opportunity qualification is not really a big deal in many organizations. They do not put in effort in their go, no go decision-making process. Some organizations do not even have a flowchart. And therefore, it's important for you to have it mapped out and have regular meetings that have been set. Come rain or sunshine, the meeting will happen. And in these meetings, we will qualify opportunities, meaning there has to be flow of opportunities that are coming into this meeting. And when you set it up and you have a standing meeting every week that you qualify opportunities, it will push you. It will elevate the departments or the people who are responsible for finding opportunities to go find those new opportunities. Competitive assessment and analysis. I mentioned there are so many tools that you can use, and we've mentioned SWOT analysis. You've done market research, and there are past performance evaluation. You know, you can never go wrong by evaluating your past performance, because how well will you know that you're performing, or how well do you know you're performing if you don't look back and see what successes you've had, or failures, and then move on from there, right? Customer engagement, looking at developing generic letters of inquiry or business development courtesy calls. How do you conduct this? Do you have a procedure of how a newbie in your organization could conduct this? Win strategy development. Win strategy development is a lot of work that will be done, and there'll be back and forth. Have you adopted an agile approach to developing this? We are looking at techniques such as interviews, past performance analysis, and competitive analysis. When we look at competitive analysis, you're looking at organizations that are of similar budget or work in the same area as you, that have similar demographics and attributes, and then you can look at them and say, where are we going wrong? If this is the case for organizations in our country, where are we going wrong? Lastly, look at action planning and execution, and that you could use a simple tool like a Gantt chart. It's simple, that it can be used by anyone. So the key here is to allocate people, because you can have all these fancy tools. You can even have them in an app. They exist. However, if there's no one assigned to conduct this, and there's no level of effort that has been identified, and the person given the time, space to really, and the freedom to really go deeper into this, then you'll find that your capture planning process will be at fault. All right. I see a question over there. All right.
No question. It was just a comment.
Oh,
So, Dr. Caroline, just to propose a question,
yes.
when you look at all of those factors or those steps to making yourself qualified, what do you think is the biggest challenge to NGOs in their process of becoming qualified in terms of the capture planning process? And can you speak to that challenge?
Many organizations, I would say, they take capture planning process very casually. They do not invest in it because it is work. It is work that people think, oh, it will lead nowhere because it's not a direct contact with a funder, and it's not a discussion where you're negotiating for funding. It's a step before you go into proposal development. And for many organizations, they feel if we invest a lot of time there, building the foundations, it's literally building the foundations. But people feel if I spend a lot of time there, I might miss out on any funding that's coming out. So I would rather not spend a lot of time and energy there, especially in qualifying funders. So what most nonprofits do is they don't qualify funders rigorously. What they do is they just go for any funding. They never say no. They just go for everything. They apply and apply and apply and hope that someone will say yes. And as we know, hope is not a strategy. When you think about organization, hope is not a strategy. You can't just apply for funding and apply and hope. You have to build your work on something. People of faith might disagree with me, but it is not a strategy in an organization to just go after everything. You have to be selective. You have to build those relationships, and you have to go for funders and partners that align with where you want to go. Sometimes it's not even where you are because you have overstayed your welcome where you are. You need to go elsewhere. You want to expand, you want to grow, you want to have another line of business. You want your program to meet the needs of a diverse group of people, not just girls, not just boys. You want to work with the entire family, and that's a different strategy. And you cannot use the same proposals to apply for funding every year because things change. Before COVID, We used to tell the story differently. Now we are telling the story differently. We heard from the gender-based violence reports that were shared on SDG 5, of how things have changed. The pandemic just turned everything upside down. And if you had a funding opportunity in 2019, it's not relevant anymore to your organization. And that's where, Dr. Ramona, many organizations, once they've written a good proposal and gotten funding with it, they just recycle it. So whether it's aligning with the donor or not, it's just recycled. A few sentences, a few new words are added, but it's the same old application. But capture planning process is telling us that every funder should be treated differently because they are unique. And even though that application that you wrote in 2019 that brought you $1 million or £1 million worked, doesn't mean that it'll work again once your 3-year period funding period has come to an end. You need to change your ways of thinking. And so these processes help you, and they are not linear. The processes are not linear. It goes back and forth. It's like, when we speak about agile process, you change here and then you realize it's not working and you go back. And so adopting this way of thinking will help organizations to identify and go for that which aligns with their organization. And it helps organization to actually have a higher win rate, as opposed to getting frustrated because you submitted 100 applications. You can submit 10 and that's it. I know of an organization that goes for a specific type of donor, and they decide we will only submit 10 funding applications in the year, and their budget is over $500,000, almost $1 billion US. And with 10 funding opportunities that they go after, they probably have 90% win rate. And that was a business decision that was made. It wasn't just a heart decision, it was also a head decision that was made by the leadership of this organization. And they decided, we are not going to run after every dollar. We are not going to run after every pound. We will be strategic. We will engage the donor. We will meet them to the point that when we are submitting an application, by that time, we will have known exactly what we are getting out of this process. And if we are not scoring 90 plus, if we are not the finalists to the point that we are invited for due diligence process, then there is no need engaging with those donors. But what happens, many organizations, because of lack of funding, because of desperation, they go for everything and anything. In ending, I wanted to share an example of a capture planning budget and how you can budget and see whether your capture planning process is actually bringing in the door or not. So when you think about capture planning process, you have to factor in a certain line items in your budget. So you have categories such as salaries for the people who be doing the work, softwares if you're going to use any software. If not, you'll need to pay for Excel sheets and be able to aggregate data on that and analyze data. Communication, because you are working with people, you're reaching out to donors, there are going to be phone calls that have to be made, there are going to be emails that have to be drawn. You will use internet, so someone has to pay for that. Transport, if you're going into a meeting, if you're meeting people in person, if you're going for site visits and you're taking donors to your community projects, you will need to invest in a good car for your organization. And if not, you will use public transport, but someone will have to pay for transport. And lastly, printing. This goes without saying, there'll be letters that need to be signed, there'll be postage and all that stuff. So this is an example of a capture planning process. And it's a bit exaggerated, but it could mean, that this organization is really invested a lot. This is just an example, and never mind the pound sign. Many organizations also invest a lot in their capture planning team. most of the time they are under business development and they invest a lot. So if you look at this organization, they basically have a budget of about 25,000, right? 25,000 um, uh, uh, for a quarter. So this is not a lot of money if you think about it. It could be that, the staff who are being paid this amount of money here, it's not that it's their full salary. It could be that just a small percentage of it is going into capture planning, and they're also engaged in project implementation or other activities. So this is just an example, an illustrative example. And so you can see every quarter they're spending 25,100, right? And if you look at the income, they have a number of funders, they have 5. And in quarter 1, they raised about 480,000 pounds from the 5 donors. Actually, it's not from the 5. They went after 5 sources of income and they only got 3. And then in the second quarter, they got 650. How do you calculate your return on investment? Return on investment equals total income minus total expenses. So if you look at your capture planning budget, the people, the software, communication, transport, printing, and any other thing that you may need to pay for, you might need to pay for the office where the business development team are based and include it there as a percentage. Not that it's the main office for business development, but capture planning process takes us, they have space in that office. So you might include all those recurring kind of costs within the organization. And so how you calculate it is, as I mentioned, return on investment, total income minus total expense. That's quite straightforward. And you can see in this case, the total income is about 50,200, and the total on this other side is just above a million. About 1,100,000 and something. And so if you take out the 50, you have 1,079,800. And that helps you to understand whether this process and the investment you're making is bringing a result. For many of us, we have very little here on salary, and we expect a lot to come out of this side. No, you must invest in your people to get something. You cannot just be on zero salary, zero software, or no communication, or very low communication, because donors and partners and anyone else who wants to serve your organization or collaborate with your organization requires for you to constantly communicate with them. And you cannot be guessing. And there's something I learned earlier with one of my coaches, and he said, a confused donor will never fund you. A confused donor will never fund you. And therefore, it's better to communicate and over communicate than under communicate and people say, I did not know, I did not see, oh, I don't understand. So that is where this is coming from. It looks simple, but many organizations fail to implement it. In conclusion, capture planning is a strategic approach to winning contracts and grants. It is a systematic, proactive, and team-driven process. There is no one-man show when it comes to capture planning. Before beginning the process, set up a clear goal with roles and responsibilities for your team. And lastly, keep your capture planning lean to ensure a higher return on investment. When we say lean is focus on people who can deliver results as opposed to just having busybodies in your office, because you need people who can do the work. So you have people who are great at desk research, keep them at desk research. You have people who are great at communicating the vision and the mission of their organization, no matter where they are in the hierarchy of their organization. Give them that role. Let them be the face of the organization. Of course, with coaching and mentorship and support, they'll be able to take your organization further. So no matter how junior someone is, if you see a talent in someone in speaking with donors, elevate that person. Let that person be the one who articulates the organization's vision, mission, and results to the donors. You see someone who might be very high in ranking in the organization, but they don't like talking to donors. So when you task them with the communication part where they have to attend meetings and they will go there because they feel obliged to go, but there's no passion in their contribution. There's no passion in their communication. And that's why for capture planning, it is not a one man or woman's show, it's a team driven process. And lastly, we encourage any organization that's interested in learning more to reach out to us at info@ngowhisperer.com. We are always more than ready to collaborate with you and to help you to achieve your results. Thank you so much. Lastly, we can achieve socio-economic development within low income countries or communities by connecting people, by raising funds and impacting lives. If you need help, there's this saying, wise and strong leaders ask for help. Thank you so much.